Hello, this is Possibility Wave. This is part 3, segment number 2. The whole series is entitled Signal Encoding Theory and Biofeedback. And the continuation now from segment number 1 of part 3. This is segment number 2. As before, it's your same presenter. This is Garnet Dupuis. I'm the co-founder and creative designer of Possibility Wave. I'm happy and proud to say. If you want to connect with us, by now you may know, but possibilitywave.com is the simple, best way to begin the whole relationship. Possibilitywave.com. As you know by now, this is a large series presentation in 4 parts. Part 1, the boundaries of belief. Part 2, compassionate communication. This is part 3 in energy encoding of signals. Part 3 is divided into 2 segments. This is segment number 2 of energy encoding of signals. Part 4, which is upcoming, a very large presentation, is information encoding of signals. I believe you know by now the basic content of each of these parts. This is part 3, segment 2, and we're exploring the use of applied energy in the encoding of signals. Segment number 1 had a good look and developed the entire theory. Segment number 2, which we're about to begin, is going to have a look at some of the highlights of recent history in the development of the concept, as well as a summary recap, and then a bridge to part number 4. So let's begin. This is part 3, segment 2 of the energy encoding of signals in biofeedback. A bit of history. We're not going to go far back, don't worry. This is a relatively short look. As a matter of fact, the goal of this segment number 2 is to try to keep it at around about a half an hour. I hope we can do that. Let's see. Segment number 1 was a bit longer at about an hour and 20 minutes. So these are some of the, what I would term the significant highlights in our recent history on the topic. We're going to start in the 1950s, which is, 65 years ago. So it's not ancient history, but it's certainly some time ago. Germany, here's a medical doctor, Dr. Reinhard Voll, and a very bright person, inventive, curious. At this time, acupuncture was still really not well accepted in the West, to be sure. It wasn't really until the 70s that it cracked open. But there were good precedents in place, and he became fascinated with the phenomena of acupuncture and acupuncture points and meridians and their relationship to organ functions and so on. And had a strong and deep insight, one of the very first to recognize that these acupoints were not just anatomical, but that they had energetic characteristics. And I don't mean subtle energetic in terms of, the whole issue is what is qi anyway. This is in the electrical magnetic range, that the points themselves had characteristics that were measurable, especially in and around resistance and conductance. So he began to measure these points in terms of their conductivity, and along with a body of theory, came to appreciate that specifically the points at the ends of the fingers and toes not only were measurable in terms of characteristics, but also in relation to associated meridians, had direct correspondences with certain organ functions and physiological aspects of metabolism. So he set about to measure these and found that the electrical characteristics had a strong relationship, that they had a kind of a reflection of the physiology of the related organs through the meridian systems. Well, this in and itself is highly significant and has to this day altered so much of the applied theory and practice of electroacupuncture and many kinds of treatment and even assessment systems. But in any case, more closely related to our interest is the fact that, and this is how the story goes, that he was working with a particular subject, a patient of his, as a medical doctor, and noticed certain peculiar behavior in various points related to certain meridians. He came to discover that the patient had on his person, in his clothing, in his pocket, a bottle of a substance to which he was having an allergic response. There was an allergen in the bottle. Now the bottle wasn't open, it wasn't leaking and pouring on his skin, it was tightly secured, but simply being on his person, we would say being within the electromagnetic field of the organism, because we know this to be absolutely true, that the organism has a field which is measurable on contact in terms of electrical characteristics, heart and brain and muscle activities, they're all measurable through electrical activity, as well as even through the extended magnetic field that originates out of the body, the strongest field, of course, being produced by the heart, a magnitude greater, several magnitudes greater than the brain, which you might think to be the strongest. Anyway, that just the bottle in the field was able to be affecting not even the field as a whole, but affecting specific aspects of organ function within the field. And he could see this by the altered behavior in the associated points. This was really a monumental observation, as in many cases, discoveries in science and medicine by chance, you could say by accident. So what he did was, having reflected upon this, came up with a really novel and inventive concept that proved to be accurate, proved to be real. What he did was he created a new aspect to his testing device. If you're looking at the slide, you'll see a photograph, and to the right of the big box, that little smaller box with a bunch of holes, these wells, we'll call them, a receptacle, that was connected into the current created between the subject's body and the grounding device. You can see the cylinder that the person would hold, and then the point device that would contact the acupoint. And what he discovered was that different items, different substances, placed in the receptacle and in therefore the current, demonstrated changes in the electrical conductance at the point, and therefore through the meridial system, activities related to the organ. This was a giant leap in the applied energetics in a system that had always been rather mysterious and now had sort of an access that hadn't been recognized before. So it became an aspect of his diagnostic as a medical doctor, or we would say in more general terms, an ability to make an assessment as to the potential effects that various substances had on physiological functions. And these functions could be monitored through the conductance or electrical characteristics at the points. This progressed further. The concept was so attractive. New ideas began to emerge, and one of them was, well, you know, got to have a lot of these test vials here. This is effective, but potentially time-consuming and even at times quite cumbersome. To have all of these vials and put in and out and in and out and in and out and test it in and out and in and out. Exciting because it's effective, but you have to wonder, is there the possibility of making this more efficient? And what slowly became apparent was that because you had the alteration of the current, these alterations could be noted, they could be monitored, and it became possible to capture these, to encode these, so that the encoded signature could replace the signature that was emanating by putting the test vial in the current. Again, another giant leap, and one that will stress the belief systems of some people and allow other people to celebrate. What you had here was the recognition that you could marry, you could conjoin certain items with energy processes that the information characteristics of that item could then influence the energetics, and that this influence could be used to make assessments. That was radical in and of itself. What then emerged wonderfully was the evidence experience, the appreciation that, oh my God, we are not limited to just using this phenomena, this fact, to make assessments, that we could also use it as a way of introducing positive information, you could say therapeutic or maybe just beneficial stimulation into the person. So this became a discovery with two fundamental features. One was the ability to make assessments as to the effectiveness or relationship of the item to the person. But the other was that it was also another way of introducing beneficial stimulations or reinforcements for the person. So these, what we'll call here, these signal signatures, what I would call in general these information codes, because they could be coded, but you can remember that you can also use them without encoding them. So sometimes just call them signal signatures, sometimes call them information codes. That they're no longer limited to the assessment capacity. And still, most of all of this is going on in Europe at this time. The situation in North America, especially the US, was far more complicated because of the legal policies of the medical industry and its early condemnation of a variety of non-conventional technologies. So Europe, a much better domain, and actually there was a huge activity going on in at that time, the USSR, in Russia, we would say, but Russia and the Ukraine, that just never made it out and into the Western Hemisphere as shared discovery because of the politics of the Cold War. In any case, In Europe in and around this time, and a good deal of it in Germany, but associated countries, Austria and the beginnings in England and Italy and so on, the concept of an electronic pharmacy came into use, so that you were capable of building a whole collection of information-coded items that then could be used for assessments and analyses and stimulations and reinforcements without having the actual original item. And naturally, as we saw in the segment number 1, there are a number of different formulations surrounding all of this, one of which the most common would be, of course, in homeopathy, which thrived in Europe before it was squelched in the Western Hemisphere. From the 50s all the way through into the 70s, so this is, you know, an evolution that's taking place not in weeks and months, but in years and even decades. Here, you know, full 20 years or so after the initial appreciations from Voll. Other individuals and groups were working to progress the principle. Here, you know, Schimmel, one of the key figures in what became known as the Vega test system, was also attempting to build on the principle. And up in the right-hand corner of the slide, if you can see it, you'll notice an early Vega test system, an isolated energy source there with a battery, and the core testing system. You can see the little receptacles with the vial wells, and also you can see in more of the background just a huge collection of test vials, because it principally remained a manual process. In working in towards the concept of information codes, identify, encode, and store, was still wobbling back and forth, because you have to recall that here in the 70s, personal computing, the whole explosive, profound effects of computing technology had not yet made its arrival. So you're working with sensitive electronics, but the ability to work with highly efficient, incredibly rapid binary processes just had not happened yet, at least not at the popular level. Which of course brings us to computer automation. This technology has so radically changed culture and society and industry and science, and of course it affects this domain. It really allows us to rapidly access, assess, and stimulate using these information codes that are derived from energy processes, as you know. It makes it so simple, easy to devise different encryption processes. It also makes it easier to apply algorithmic monitoring of processes. It has such a big effect in the encoding and the storage aspects that its influence, really, it's hard to underestimate what it's done. No, hard to overestimate. Anyway, the fact is, however, that the identification process with applied energy is not really altered that much by the computer process. The computer has a big effect on encoding and in storage and, you know, application features. But other than as a secondary influence, the energy encoding processes, the applied energy approach, is not substantially altered by computers. Okay, let's now do a basic recap, kind of sew it together, as well as create the beginnings of a bridge that'll carry us from this part 3 to part 4. You will recall that part 4 focuses on the information encoding of signals using pure information processes, whereas this part 3 has been all about applied energy processes. A hidden order of reality. David Bohm, one of the cardinals of quantum mechanics and the associated discoveries, he says that there's an implicate order. An implicate order, it's also been called a hidden order, that there's something influencing, guiding, and instructing all of these behaviors in energy and the mass aspects of matter. There have been so many attempts to try to recognize this, and he called it the implicate order, the hidden order. So in a sense, when we use these applied energy processes to create the information codes, what we're doing is we're using the energy process to help make something that is more or less invisible to become more visible, something that seems to be hidden from us, even though we know very well that it's not trying to hide, but our way of looking makes it appear to be hidden, that it brings it out into the open in a way that we can recognize, that we can identify. You will remember, and I really can't make this more important than by repeating it, is that the possibility wave axiom is that awareness is the single fundamental matrix of reality. This is our starting point. You may recall from the past presentations that matrix actually means the great mother. Consciousness, information, energy, and matter are all manifest aspects of awareness. If you had humored me with my focus on the verb to be is, I think, the most important verb in our language. It allows me to say awareness is. So, what's an information code? We say that information affects the field, and that field is created by awareness. Information affects this field in such a manner that the field then guides or instructs the energy and the matter. It's okay to talk about them as separate things, but remember, they're not. They're not even things. It's possible to detect characteristics of this information in a variety of ways. David Bohm said it's an implicate, a kind of a hidden order. So there are ways to detect these characteristics that are typically not easily detectable most of the time because their intensity by our relative measure is so low. So we can bring up the expression, and once it's brought up, we can monitor this. These activity behaviors of the energy have a direct relationship to the specific item, or they are the item. Even saying that they have a relationship is sort of a faux pas. What's the matter? What's the matter? Again, as a quick recap, we know that all matter is composed of atoms, and reflecting back to Heisenberg, another general of quantum mechanics, he reminds us quite simply, atoms are not things. You, like myself, probably encountered them, and it's probably still happening in school to this day, where when they show the atom, they show this little model that looks kind of like a solar system. The sun in the middle with the planets going round and round. You have the nucleus with its protons, neutrons, like the sun, and the electrons are going around like Venus and Mars and Earth, and it's just not like that at all. Atoms, we know fully well now, are 99.999% space. You and I are composed of atoms. All the stuff we see around us is composed of atoms. Seem to be solid, indivisible objects, but in fact, 99.999% space. And you go even further, the particles, the little balls, they're not little balls at all. That they're now described as just concentrations of possibility waves. Electrons, when you read the descriptions that are current, they say that there's kind of, in the atom there's this cloud of behavior. It's kind of electronish cloud of behavior surrounding this core cloud of proton, neutron-ish behavior. It's really so wonderful. We say at Possibility Wave that matter is the form aspect of awareness. What's the matter? We also know from our best current science that matter, this mass concentration of energy and information, that it's always excited. It's not passive, it's not dumb and dead, that it's always in an excited form. That means that it has basic energy behaviors. That's its nature. And that it's possible to monitor this behavior and to use this monitored energetic behavior as a way of identifying the information characteristics. Even more than that, we can take matter and excite it by pumping more energy into its basic state. So we can excite it up from its basic state in a way to tease out the information characteristics. I don't know, the image, which is kind of silly or maybe horrible, like kicking a sleeping tiger. You get to see a lot more of its behavior characteristics if you arouse it, especially with a kick. Be careful. Along the same little mini task right now of recapping, we know that not only is it possible using applied energy processes to identify the information characteristics of an item, but we're also capable of encoding this information. We take certain specific algorithms, and you will recall that we'll target certain aspects of the behavior. Remember that diagram from segment number 1 where we might choose amplitudes, we might choose slopes, we might choose frequencies, we might choose the rate of change between one and the other. We make that decision, and that's all okay. And that in that way you can harvest the data. And once you're harvesting it, then you can encrypt or encode this in such a manner that now you have kind of captured at an information level the information characteristics. With that, and we can go very low tech, store it in like an imprinted medium, or go more what we would call currently high tech as a code, that the identification, encoding, and storage process is possible, and as a consequence, we have all of these multiple purposes and uses that are made available to us. Here's a simple example. Right now, I assume that you're hearing my voice. Are you? Actually, it's not my voice. It's an information code of my voice, which is now being activated through your speakers or your headphones. You can hear it. My voice was identified, encoded, and stored for future use, such as you going online and playing this video presentation. This is the end of part 3, segment number 2. You will recall that the whole series is 4 parts, and they are designed to be experienced as a learning process in sequence. 1, 2, 3, 4. You don't have to do that. If you listen and experience them out of sequence, you may need to go back to other parts for a deeper clarification, because different parts will rely on previous concepts. So thanks very much. It's about half an hour. It's been great spending the time with you, and I hope you look forward to part number 4.